Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. In his Treatise of Human Nature, section 6 of part 4 of book 1, David Hume is going to dig deep into what constitutes identity. Now, the section is titled Of Personal Identity, and the portion in the middle doesn't bear directly on personal identity, but identity more broadly. But it's going to have a lot of important implications once we turn to thinking about, do we really have a self, according to Hume? And he's interested in why we have this tendency to ascribe identity of some sort to things that he thinks don't actually have it. So he's going to say we have a distinct idea of an object that remains invariable and uninterrupted through a supposed variation of time. This idea we call identity or sameness. So it's an idea that we can reference. It's the same, presumably, for all of us, regardless of what minds this idea is happening in. We also, he says, have another distinct idea of several different objects existing in succession and connected together by a close relation. And this is a notion of diversity, as if there was no matter of relation among the objects, right? So we've got identity or sameness, and then we've got diversity or difference within a set of objects that are close enough to compare to each other. And Hume thinks that while we can distinguish these in our minds, and we're going to as philosophers, in ordinary life, and even in a lot of philosophy, these get confounded with each other. He says that that action of the imagination by which we consider the uninterrupted and invariable object and that by which we reflect on the succession of related objects are almost the same to the feeling, nor is there much more effort of thought required in the latter case than the former. So they feel similar in our heads, and they're kind of close to each other. And so he says this facilitates the transition of the mind from one object to another and renders its passage as smooth as if it contemplated one continued object. So even though objects are really a succession of differences, we view them as the same thing and as being the same thing, even when we're not like looking at them or registering them. And so he says this is the cause of the confusion and mistake, and it makes us substitute the notion of identity instead of that of related objects. But if we think about it, reflectively, we can correct this. Now, we can't do that for a long time. That's essentially doing philosophy. He says we can have a more accurate method of thinking, but we can't long sustain our philosophy or take off this bias from the imagination. Our last resource is to yield to it and boldly assert these differently related objects are in effect the same, however interrupted and variable. So we know that if we're doing this analysis, we know that we're getting things wrong, and yet we're drawn to it. So how do we get around that? Hume says that we feign a principle. Now, he's going to use another word a little bit later, fiction. We, in effect, lie to or trick ourselves into thinking that things that are a succession of different, closely related, but different, matters are actually the same thing, and what we're going to attribute to them is self or soul or substance. Now, if it's ourselves or other people, we're going to talk about the self or the soul. In the case of most other things, we'll talk about them being substances, and Hume is saying they're really not. There's nothing that remains the same in them. Something else is going on. So how the hell does this actually work, right? He says this isn't just a dispute of words when we attribute identity to plants and vegetables or even to animals or even to ourselves. We attribute identity in an improper sense to variable or uninterrupted objects. Our mistake then is not confined to the expression, but involves a fiction, something that we make up. And why do we do that? Well, because the mind associates its contents, impressions and ideas, perceptions, we could say, according to principles of association of ideas that Hume has worked out earlier. What are they? Well, there's three big ones. Resemblance, things resemble each other. Contiguity, in space and in time. And causation, or cause and effect. We bring these relations to the objects and we connect them together in that way. And so we can say, yes, there's actually some sort of identity. As the succession answers to our notion of diversity, it can only be by mistake we ascribe it to an identity. And as the relation of parts which leads us to this mistake is nothing but equality, which produces an association of ideas and an easy transition of the imagination from one to another, he says, right? So we're doing this all of the time. And he says, suppose any mass of matter of which the parts are contiguous and connected, so an object, any object you like, to be placed before us, we must attribute a perfect identity to this mass, provided all parts continue uninterruptedly and invariably. But now here we can make some experiments. Well, what if it changes a little bit? What if we have a coin and we shave off just a little bit of that coin? Does it stop being that coin? It's changed it. There's a diversity of one moment to the next. No, we're going to say it's the same coin, right? Now think about our bodies, right? We're constantly changing cells and things about us are visibly changing over time, but we're still who we are, aren't we? If the changes are small or inconsiderable, we don't actually notice it. We don't say it's changing it from the identity of the whole. And he says, well, what about bigger changes? He says, imagine that we have a mountain, right? Adding or subtracting a mountain from a planet. It actually doesn't make that big of a difference. Except, I suppose, if you're looking at it right there. But there might be some things, changing a few inches would be enough to destroy the identity of some bodies. Why is this the case? How do we decide those sorts of things? It's kind of on a, pragmatic basis, we might actually say. He says, what about a change in a part of a body that destroys its identity? If we change it gradually and insensibly, we're probably going to think it's the same thing. And so we could ask ourselves, well, how do we get fooled? How do we fool ourselves with this? What are we thinking remains the same or an identity there? And here Hume is going to lead us through a couple different steps that make it more and more, we could say, intensively identical. So maybe it's not just having certain parts, but the way in which the parts are related to the whole, what he calls the proportion of parts, right? The parts are put together in a certain way. So you can change the parts change themselves, but so long as they have the same basic structure and, size in relation to each other, maybe it's the same thing. Consider a human being. As we grow our bodies, we reach a certain state where most of our parts are kind of done growing, but apparently from what physiologists tell us, our ears and our noses, as we get older, they keep on growing, right? That's changing the proportion of the parts. But we don't say 70-year-old Greg Sadler is something different than 50-year-old Greg Sadler is something different than 10-year-old Greg Sadler, right? It's the same thing, although it's not the same thing. So proportion of the parts to a whole. And then we could also talk about, here we start to get into natural or human purposes, the reference of the parts to some common end or purpose. And he's going to bring up the famous ship of Theseus example here, a ship of which a considerable part has been changed by frequent reparations is still considered as the same, nor does the difference of the materials hinder us from ascribing an identity to it. Why? Because the common end to which the parts conspire remains the same under the variations. And so our imagination can say, yeah, it's the same ship, isn't it? Or think about when we change things on our phones or our computers. New operating system. A new operating system, really from this perspective, is a different configuration of the parts. But, it's being used for the same purpose. And then, here's where we get to organic things. We might talk about what he calls the sympathy of the parts in that common end and reciprocal cause and effect. So he says that in all their actions and operations, this is the case with animals and vegetables. Not only the several parts have reference to some general purpose, but also a mutual dependence on and connection with each other. And so he says that the effect of so strong a relation is though everyone must allow in a few years both vegetables and animals endure a total change, yet we still attribute identity to them where their form, size, and substance are entirely altered. An oak growing from a small plant to a large tree, it's still the same oak. Even though there's not one particle of matter or figure of its parts the same, an infant becomes a man and is sometimes fat, sometimes lean, without any change in his identity. But there is a change in his identity because strictly speaking, there never was an identity to change or not change, but we ascribe it to them. And he's going to finish up this section by bringing up two very interesting phenomena. So one of these is when he says we can confuse numerical and specific identity. So specific identity, the kind of thing it is. Numerical identity, is it this thing or this thing of that type? And he uses the example of hearing a noise. So you hear a noise, and you're like, aha, I hear something. And then you hear the same noise again. Well, no, it's not the same noise. It is a similar noise. But we say, yes, I heard the same noise. We're asserting identity, aren't we? And you could say we do this all the time. Think about listening to a song and you hear somebody playing a single note and then playing that same note again. And no, it's not the same note, even if it has exactly the same physical characteristics, because it's happening at a different place in time, right? So we do this all the time. And he goes on and says, we can also remark that there are certain objects, certain things that are in their nature changeable and inconstant, and we're much more willing to see them changing and say it's still the same thing. What would be an example of this? A river that consists in the motion and change of parts. In less than 24 hours, these are totally altered. This doesn't hinder the river from continuing the same during several ages. What is natural and essential to a thing is in a manner expected, and what is expected makes less impression and appears of less moment than what is unusual and extraordinary. So we're even kind of inconsistent when it comes to ascribing identity to a lot of things. And all of these identities, according to Hume, are in effect fictions. We feign them. If we were being very strict in our philosophy, we would not say that of things. Of course, that would make the world kind of a chaos for us, And instead, we do believe that there are substances and selves and all of that we ascribe identity to. Hume is, in his view, showing us the mechanism by which we create identity where it doesn't actually exist.